She's in Bali for 2 months.
Oh, nice.
She lives in Warsaw. That's her base.
Oh.
Yeah, I'm very jealous.
I've
Okay.
never been to Bali, but it sounds lovely. Yeah, so the first question that I would ask to clarify, does the user always deploy first and then enable? When we're talking about deploying, what are we talking about? That could mean two things. You're either deploying managed apps to your cluster, like Prometheus, or you're deploying your own application.
I think
And
it's the
depending on
latter.
what we're, yeah, so
I think it's
depending
the
what we're asking
application.
here is that you could do it either way. So the user on scenario A could deploy their app and say, hey, you know what would be cool? Some metrics about my app. Let me put some metric stuff in my cluster, like Prometheus or whatever, and then do it after. Or there could be, very organized and say, I'm going to put all the things I need in place first, and then I'm going to deploy my app. So there's no really one way to do it. It's multiple ways, and this could be done.
Based on
Now,
performance, maybe an operator would first get everything ready for the developer before the developer deploys.
so that's in a more like non-startup kind of way, right? Where you're seeing it's an enterprise customer and they're requesting something from a DevOps engineer, and the DevOps engineer gives them kind of a platform to deploy to. Yeah, in that case, it could be like that. So it is possible that the user may want to enable monitoring before deploying. Yeah, that's totally possible. So yeah, both. I guess the answer is both, depending on the team that's being served. I think that small teams and small startups are kind of deploy first, monitor later, and big enterprises are more, let's put the full platform in place and then you deploy. So both ways, yeah.
Cool, that makes sense. So next question, how does enabling monitoring fit with the other configuration jobs to be done? At what point does the user enable monitoring?
Yeah, so I guess that there's a little bit of overlap with the last question. So we all already talked about at what point does the user enable monitoring, and it could be either before or after. There's no really one answer for that.
I think.
And how does it fit in with the other jobs to be done? That's kind of a overly broad question. I think that it fits in. Sorry, go ahead.
I think she's trying to see if journeys overlap. So.
Yeah, I would say that it kind of fits in that anything that you need for operation or observability kind of follows the same job to be done flow, right? So let's say, hey, I have my app, but now I want to secure it. So I want HTTPS. So you go to your cluster, and you find an app that matches your purpose, and you install it. Monitoring is kind of the same way. If you deployed your app and now you want to get some metrics for health or stuff like that, then the flow is kind of the same. And for the second use case that we talked about, where it's kind of a DevOps engineer setting this up for you, kind of the same. All right, you first set up all the requirements, and the flow is kind of the same. Now, the requirements specific per team may vary, right? Because not every team is going to want to have like an in-cluster runner, or not every team is going to want to have, I don't know, some other like cert manager, right? Like an AWS customer may probably be using something else other than cert manager. So they probably have a different flow that's outside of GitLab for that. But yeah, I would say those operators' jobs to be done all follow kind of the same flow. So they fit in with the other configuration use cases, I would say almost one-to-one, I would say.
Just out of curiosity, is there any monitoring from any of the other applications? So would any of the other applications use Prometheus or any other monitoring app? Or
yes, so when you deploy, for example, functions with Knative, the monitoring piece is dependent on Prometheus. So if you want to see, for example, like your function has been used, you need to install Prometheus. Otherwise, you cannot see the full, like you cannot get the full serverless experience. Oh, sorry. I was saying that, yes. So for example, with Knative, sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, now I can hear you.
Okay. I was saying that, for example, with Knative functions, if you want to get the full experience with monitoring included, that shows you how many times your function has been invoked, or you want to see, so that requires Prometheus in addition to Knative, right? So Knative provides you with the ability to do things, then Prometheus provides you with the ability to see things and observe.
How do you connect these two? Is it through code or through
So as a user, as an end user, you install both of those apps in your cluster and they're automatically connected for you. There's nothing that you have to do.
Okay. And where would we envision this Knative monitoring? On a project level or on the cluster level, on the managed applications level?
Right now, it happens wherever your function lives. So if your function lives on your project, then you'll see them there. Right now, if I set up a group level cluster, I can't really set up individual functions at the group level. They have to be set up at the project level. So it will always be viewed from the project level, where you deploy a function, but the cluster itself may have been deployed to a group level.
And these different functions might communicate as well, correct?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, one may trigger the other, and they may be interfacing for sure.
Okay, let's go to her next question to get through all of them. How do the steps for enabling monitoring differ from a self-managed instance? Is anything different, actually?
Yeah, so I think that the only main difference here, the short answer is no, nothing is different. You follow the same steps. We see a lot of self-managed users are deploying clusters on their infrastructure, so they don't have a way to easily add the cluster to their project, right? Whereas if you create a cluster from GitLab, it's a couple of clicks. So the experience is different for self-managed customers in that they have to kind of log into the command line of their cluster and gather the credentials from the cluster, like the API URL, the certificates, the token, and then plug them in. So that's, I would say, the only difference in adding the cluster. But as far as steps to monitor it, it's the same. Yeah, there's nothing that's different.
Okay. When we move to the CI model for installing managed apps, this is a can of worms. Will it open up opportunities for us to automate the process of installing Prometheus Ingress in Elasticsearch, I guess? For example, would it make it possible to install all apps necessary for the application monitoring, to make it possible to view metrics and logs automatically when deploying an application? Do you see any issues with that approach?
Yeah, so the short answer is that we have that opportunity today. So if we wanted to install all of those apps automatically, there's nothing stopping us from doing it today. There will be nothing stopping us from doing it when we move to the CI model. So the reality is that not every user that's using the Kubernetes integration is using GitLab managed apps. So it would be kind of a very heavy-handed assumption that we would be making of saying, hey, if you add your cluster, then means immediately that you want to use GitLab managed apps, and that's not the case. So we have a lot of customers, especially enterprise customers, that are more concerned with security, that don't use GitLab managed apps because of the approach that we have, where the credentials that you give to GitLab are cluster-wide, and people don't like that.
Yeah.
So we have a couple of issues in the future to plan for that. But yeah, I would say that it makes no difference now versus when we move to the CI model. It's the same. But we wouldn't want to make that assumption because of some of the problems that I just outlined.
And also possibly some users have installed these applications externally and maybe somehow connect them to GitLab, right? Like Prometheus, there is an API to connect it.
So there's this other flow where your software development team already had a Kubernetes practice and you're already using Kubernetes. You already have patterns for namespaces and applications and things like that. And then you add the cluster to GitLab because you want to see things like deployments and deploy boards and pod logs and web terminals and use all of these cool features. But GitLab doesn't recognize the fact that there are already apps installed in cluster. And, you know, to be quite honest, it's quite hard because the approach and the patterns that people follow for that may be wildly different, right? We have a very opinionated approach of installing those apps in a particular namespace, deploying your app to a particular namespace, things like that. So yeah, I would say that if you have an existing Kubernetes practice, we have an opportunity to kind of recognize what apps are already installed in your cluster and show that state in the Kubernetes page. And let's say that would require for you to follow, you know, some nomenclature that we give you about apps have to be installed in this namespace and you have to follow this and that. And then we could recognize what's already installed in your cluster. So yeah, we have an issue out there for kind of querying cluster state and show you what we found in your cluster. Like you already have Prometheus, you already have, and yeah, the other thing, as you point out, is that there are people that may already have Prometheus installed, and they use, like, you know, different instances of Prometheus for different things, and that's what they want to use for their app. They don't want to deploy it per cluster with GitLab. They just want to use what they have on their existing infrastructure. So then you go to settings, and then you have to kind of set up your integration manually. Okay. And that's perfectly fine. Yeah.
That's what I wanted to ask. There is an opportunity to import your integration, well, to integrate your Prometheus with GitLab to show the metrics.
Well, we support that today. So okay, you can manually do that. If you go to settings, we have an integrations area in those settings. And one of those integrations is Prometheus. Okay. And you can completely set that up manually. Yeah. So
I guess that's another journey that maybe I haven't seen here, maybe. Cluster hasn't been created yet, the application. So maybe that's a flow that's missing to add metrics when you already have a...
Yeah, that's right. When you already have a Prometheus instance that you want to kind of reuse for your project.
Yeah, because she has here expand Prometheus and go to manage clusters and go to cluster page and install Prometheus. But yeah, probably there's another flow here for integrating Prometheus via settings. Okay, so I think that you could comment separately in the mural. From looking at the flows, do you see any important gaps or anything that's incorrect? We might have identified one flow that's missing to integrate through integrations to add Prometheus. And that's more relevant to the last point. And can you think of any other missing use cases or user flows? Can you think of any other?
I think we touched on both, right? There are some flows or some assumptions that we have here that may not be correct. And then some flows that may be missing. But other than that, everything that's on the mural, I think, is right.
Okay, let me check the chat she created also. Yeah, I think it's the same questions. So yeah, if you could take a look at the board as well for the flows, and I will send her this video, and hopefully it's informative. Okay.
Great. And yeah, it would be great to touch base also with the monitoring PMs, right? With Dove, Sarah, and Kevin, since, I don't know, I'm sure that our perspectives are pretty much aligned, but still, you know, it'd be good for her to sync up with them as well. So yeah. I'll send her a note to that effect.
That would be great. Well, Nadia and I maybe can brainstorm and sketch solutions and then present to all PMs and see if it excites or it frustrates.
Yeah, okay.
Cool. See you in a minute in Configure.
All right, cool. Bye.
Thank you for that.